Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Okay.
Hi, Laini.
Hi.
How do you feel? Oh, sorry. Okay. Pues bienvenidos. Les damos una calurosa bienvenida de parte de sello Alfaguara, Penguin Random House. Muchas gracias por estar aquí en la presentación de Sueños de Dioses y Monstruos de Laini Taylor. Érase una vez un tiempo en el que solo existía la oscuridad y monstruos grandes como mundos que vagaban por ella, hasta que llegó un amor tan poderoso que unió todos los mundos con puntadas de luz. Laini, cuéntanos, ¿por qué decidiste escribir para jóvenes?
I'm figuring this out. You see me looking to the translator. Sorry. Why did I decide to write for young people? Oh, everyone has headphones on. That's how it works. I'm sorry. I'm flabbergasted. I'm not sure I ever really made a decision to write for young people. After university, when I was trying to write, I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I was writing what I thought I should be writing, literature for grown-ups, and it really I wasn't having much fun with it. I hadn't found my voice as a writer. And then somewhere along the way, I discovered some books. First of all, Harry Potter. That reminded me of the kind of books that made me a reader when I was young, and I fell in love with fantasy again, and also with books for young people, and I started reading a lot of fantasy for younger readers, and when I started writing again, I just naturally started writing for that audience as well, and I found that it fit me really well. So it wasn't ever a choice that I made, it just happened.
Bueno, hay distintos subgéneros en la literatura juvenil actual, romance, distopía, de corte realista. Y yo quisiera saber por qué te sentiste atraída a escribir toda una historia, toda una saga de fantasía, del género de fantasía, de épica, este mundo tan aguerrido que has construido y además tan apocalíptico.
I think, again, fantasy wasn't really a choice. It's the most fun. It's much more fun than any other kind of books, I think. Do you guys agree? When I try to write something that isn't fantasy, it becomes fantasy anyway. Somebody grows wings or something happens. So it's really, I think it is my voice and it is who I am. That said, I am writing a science fiction book right now that's very grounded in a historical period, so it's really different, and we'll see how that goes. Yeah.
Muy bien. Seguramente muy interesante y complejo, porque Sueños de Dioses y Monstruos es Es un libro complejo, es un mundo muy rico, ¿no? En matices, en la prosa, en los personajes, desde luego, ¿no? Como con todo este bestiario de seres excepcionales, pues que han cautivado a tanta gente, ¿no? Está aquí. Y en el libro hay como un ambiente como de inquietud, de angustia, como la sensación de estar en arenas movedizas. Incluso no se nombran ciertas cosas, se refiere ahí el narrador como aquello, ellos, algo, ese algo, ¿no? ¿Por qué tú escogiste esta especie de incertidumbre como un recurso para narrar tu libro?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question.
Es como una sensación.
I don't know.
I'm sorry. Es como una sensación de no saber qué hay más allá, ¿no? Como de qué va a pasar, esta sensación de expectativa muy acentuada. Es como parte del suspenso, ¿no? Me imagino. ¿Sí?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I think so. Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think a lot about the experience of the reader when I'm writing. I mean, I write what I want to read, but I'm definitely thinking about creating and crafting an experience. And every step of the way, I'm mindful of what the reader does and doesn't know, what I want them to know, what I want them to be wondering and thinking about. And I always want them to be a little bit off balance and not knowing what to expect and feeling like anything could happen, you know. So I guess I do it very consciously to create the page turn and a suspenseful story. And it's the kind of story that I enjoy as a reader, so it's what I try to create or evoke as a writer. I don't want you ever to be comfortable with what's coming.
Claro. Esa es la sensación exactamente, como esta cosa así como inquietud y quieres es como un juego esto de los adultos. La verdad. Pero sí, se siente como esta inquietud leyendo, ¿no? Es muy cautivante la narración, me parece. Y este exotismo que pones, la ciudad de Eres, la ciudad de Praga, Marruecos, quedándose un rato en la charla de café sobre por qué habías escogido Praga, ¿no? Pero aquí hay mucha más gente y a lo mejor nos gustaría saber también. ¿Y qué fue lo más difícil de crear este mundo? ¿Qué fue para ti mientras estás escribiendo, no?
Okay. I love to travel. It's one of my favorite things. And so when I'm writing a book, I don't want to write a book that's in a familiar place to me. As a reader, I want to travel to other worlds and experience other worlds. And so as a writer, I want to create that experience too. And the story about why we chose Prague is because in 2004, my husband went to Prague to research another book, a comic book that we were going to do. It was going to be a vampire story. This was before Twilight. It seemed like a good idea.
Creo que sí,
Jim is an illustrator, and I guess we had done our first book together prior to that. It was a comic book, a graphic novel. And so we went to Prague to research the story so that we could take photos of where the vampires would hunt in Prague. And we had a great time. But then when we got home, we ended up not doing it because I had some interest from an editor in my first novel. And so I diverted my attention to finishing that and then just never returned to the comic book. So Prague as a setting was just waiting in my mind all those years, I think. And on the day that Karou and Brimstone came into being, I started looking around for where they would live or where Karou would live, and Prague was just perfect. It's a city that's very magical and fairy tale-like, but also dark and kind of creepy, with a big history of magic and alchemy. And so feeling, but it's also a real city where real teenagers live and go to school. So it was the perfect setting. And then with Morocco, I had never been there, but I was fascinated to go. So I wrote it without going. And then after the book was finished, my husband and daughter and I went to Morocco, and that was where I was inspired to write the setting for the second book, by going to southern Morocco in the desert to the Kasbahs. And so that's how that came about. And then I went to Eretz in order to research Eretz. Yeah, so. Right? I won't tell you where the portal is, though. Yeah, sorry.
Esto del portal es también un poco de ciencia ficción, ¿no? De alguna manera. Bueno, es muy fantasía, porque no estás poniendo elementos realmente de ciencia, ¿no? De pronto te da esa sensación, ¿no? Como...
Well, I think a portal, it's a very classic kind of fantasy, is a portal. It's a classic fantasy trope. But I think there is an element in these books. By the third book, there is a feeling almost that in some way it is science fiction, that there's parallel worlds and, I don't know, string theory, things like that. But for me, it's still very firmly fantasy. I don't know enough science to write science fiction, really.
Claro, ok. Bueno, tus personajes tienen cualidades muy humanas, ¿no? Esta capacidad de enamorarse intensamente, de sentir miedo, rencor, son capaces de traicionar y de sentir venganza. Deseos de venganza, ¿no? O ser leales y combativos, pero bueno, los personajes principales son quimeras, son demonios, son ángeles monumentales y que nos inspiran miedo. Y yo quisiera saber cómo le hiciste para dotar a estos personajes de cualidades fuera de lo humano, más allá de lo humano, ¿no? ¿Qué los distingue?
I think, when I'm writing a character, kind of creature they are, what race they are, I'm writing human emotion. I think to turn on some other complete emotion, the good guys and the bad guys. And as for the creature attributes and I'm not sure if I'm answering this well. For me, it's important that all of the beings in the story, they're just creatures living their lives in their world the best that they can. And there's no good guys or bad guys, or there's a few bad guys, like there will be in reality, in a real war. Maybe the evil, but the are just people. They've been raised to hate and unfortunately, in most cases, it's impossible to unlearn that. And that, for me, was the heart of the story. Can you learn not to hate? Can that ever change? But they're people. I like the idea of taking demons and angels, quote unquote, but just turning them into a race of real creatures that are neither good nor evil. They're just people. It's more interesting for me than having a heavenly war between good and evil, where everything's black and white. The idea that a soldier isn't evil for following orders, but he will do evil things, and it's a much more complex question for me. And as for making them creatures, angels and demons, that's part of where fantasy comes in and makes it more fun. To create the different tribes of chimera is just a lot more colorful and imaginative than writing a story about humans. And also, one of the great things about fantasy, besides it just being more fun than realism, is that it's a great window for looking at the real world, or looking at big war and honor and hatred and even nobility, true love, through the lens of fantasy, when you look at, if you were to tell a story about a real war, say you're talking about Israel and Palestine, everyone has their preconceived ideas about it, and so it's really hard to look at the bigger questions of racism and hatred in that context. But you take it out of that context and write it in a fantasy situation, and you can look at it with fresh eyes, I think. And so I think fantasy is great for letting us look at universal concepts in a way that's not encumbered by, our human education, our context, and our newspapers, everything that we think that we know or that we think that we think. I don't know, that went far from the question.
No, para nada. No, está. Sí, muchas gracias.
Okay.
Nada, hace rato estabas platicando acerca de la responsabilidad de los de crecer, como este asunto de que morían los padres y que eso ayudaba a que el personaje creciera o que fuera autosuficiente. Comentar al respecto.
We were talking earlier, somebody asked me why Brimstone had to leave the story. Oh, I'm sorry. But if you try to imagine what the story would be if Brimstone were consistently present, I think maybe Karou would keep going to art school and nothing would have happened. It's a trope in literature for young people that you have to find a way to remove the grown-ups from the story. It's not always necessary to kill them. My daughter's making a face at me from the front row. Sorry. But in my first books, which were for younger readers, the young character who was a fairy had to be away from her parents. But in that case, the solution was that she was traveling with a band of theatrical crows and doing theater for fairies. So that's a little different. I couldn't do that with this book. Karou, it was really necessary that she be alone. At the end of the first act of Daughter of Smoke and Bone, she is utterly alone. The doors have closed. And after I wrote that section, I tried to write scenes where she was still going to school and wondering what had happened. And I realized I didn't want to know about that character who would keep doing that character who would keep going to school and just wondering what had happened. I wanted to know about a character who would do everything she could to figure out how to get back to her family. And so then the story started to go again because I realized that importance of the character having agency and initiative and that depth of resourcefulness and loyalty. And if she never lost anyone, she would never be challenged. And I think, hopefully we don't all need to have a hard lesson, but we'll all face loss at some point. And in the case of a story like this, where you're taking a character who you have to put on a big stage and ask very huge things of them, it was important that she be left to she have a period of trying to figure out what to do now. A story about war, there must be loss.
Yeah, claro. ¿Qué te gusta más? ¿Narrar la historia con la voz del narrador o hacer hablar a tus personajes?
That's a great question. I love writing dialogue. I think it's the place where the story is the most alive and where it makes the most direct connection with the reader, where you feel like you're inside the story. So I think I try to have as much dialogue as possible and have the information of the story come through the characters' own voices instead of the narrative. But I also love narrative writing, and that's why I write in third person, is because I love to take a step back and and see from different angles what's happening and why I use different narrators, why I shift my point of view and have multiple perspectives so that I can where do I want to see it from? Do I want to see this from Akiva's point of view and see what's happening to Karou, or do I want to be inside Karou's mind while it's happening? And it gives me a lot of options, a lot of tools as a storyteller. I like to do everything. I think there are a lot of rules that young writers will be told not to break, like not to use multiple point of view, or story structure should be a certain way, or all these things. And I think that the story has to be the guide, and I do what I want to do. I write what I want to read, and I want to see both sides of the scene. When Akiva and Karou are in a scene together, I want to know what they're both thinking. I don't just want to know what one of them is thinking. So I give myself permission to do that. And I love having the option to use any. When I was in art school, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from an illustration instructor. And this advice was, purity sucks. I don't know how you say that in Spanish. It sounds good. But that you shouldn't worry about the rules too much and making something perfect. You should do anything you need to do to create the effect that you want to create, even if it's against the rules, I guess. And so I just sort of do what I want to do when I'm writing. And I think it's probably good, because if I knew what I was going to do in Daughter of Smoke and Bone, if I really thought about it too much or outlined it, it would have occurred to me that it was an unorthodox story structure to have the entire third act be a flashback. And I would have maybe thought, that's not a good idea, I'm not going to do that. But the story needed to be that way. So I'm glad I didn't think too much about following the rules.
Sí, a veces las historias te van llevando a donde tú no querías, ¿no? Es lo que muchos autores comentan. Sí. Y bueno, a veces las historias están narradas en tiempo presente, es como algo a lo que recurren muchos autores recientemente, pero si la historia te dice que es mejor narrarla en tiempo más claro o pretérito, como digamos, pues lo sigues, ¿no? Yo me imagino que es como tu intuición de... Okay. ¿Y cuál de tus bestias o demonios o ángeles te dio más miedo a la hora de escribir?
Well, first I'll go way back to my first book, which was a sweeter story, although it was still an adventure story, but a character appeared one day who was a demon, or a monster, I guess, whose mouth was a wound that would heal shut if he went too long without eating. And then he would have to eat it open. He would have to eat his own, tear his own mouth open in order to eat. It was really gross. Where that came from, but it was a little horrifying. And my editor said, "Do you want to take that out?" And I said no. His name was Gut Suck. I don't know how that translates. But I guess in the current trilogy, I mean, Thiago was, yeah. And of course, Jael. The ones that are more fun to write are usually the secondary villains, like Razgut. I always tend to have a character that's like that, that's a villain, and the story will turn on what they do, but they're also humorous or comical, but also very awful. So that's fun. I guess the most horrifying, well, let's see if I can remember his name.
Son tantos.
Oh, see if anybody else can remember. The character in the second book who carries the stained sack of trophies, the one who attacks Karou.
A ver, ¿quién se acuerda por allá? Nadie. No puede
Razor?
ser.
razor. I think you're right. Thank you. And when you said it, I was like, is that right? It didn't even, I don't know. That was pretty creepy. Yeah.
Okay. ¿Y a qué le temes más? ¿Al advenimiento de seres de otro mundo o a la imposibilidad del amor que se ve mucho en la historia? Esta invasión de los seres ¿no?
What would I fear more as a person?
O bueno, como mientras estabas inmersa en la historia.
That's an interesting question. I felt that, I mean, I feel usually that to some degree I'm in control, to some degree. So I think there maybe were times where I worried that I wouldn't be able to find a believable way that Karou and Akiva could be together. And so it's possible that I have said along the way, I don't know if they'll end up together because they might have other ideas, but I knew the ending I had in mind. And I knew I would find it somehow. Writing the Seraph invasion or arrival was really interesting. It was scary for me as a writer because I had to think on the whole global scale, what would the reaction be? You know, how would the governments act? How would the military act? How would the people act? What would happen if that really happens? And I felt a little out of my depth. You know, I don't know what the military would do if that really happened, but I tried to come up with something that seemed believable. But I love the idea of bringing fantastic events into the real world and playing with the reactions of people. You know, if something like that really did happen, I think sometimes, what would it take to make us believe we were witnessing otherworldly? Because we're so trained to accept special effects, and I think you could see a lot and believe you had stumbled onto a movie set or something. So I like the idea of putting people, and I use scientists because that was the most dramatic, I think. If scientists were forced to confront something they would say is absolutely impossible, and yet they're seeing it with their own eyes, you know, what would happen? I just love to juxtapose the fantasy and the real that way. So, but I think that the lack of love would be much more terrifying than the invasion, if that's the question. Yeah. That would be a much worse ending, I think.
Ouch. Sí, ouch. Pues muchas gracias. Ahora quisiéramos darle la voz a la gente que está aquí. Entonces, siéntanse libres de preguntar. Yo, no, ya escojan.
Ya, corazón, dáselo bien.
Mayra. Ay, perdón, no te vi.
Hi, Laini. Right here.
Hi, Laini. First of all, a big fan of the three books. My question is related to the end of the third book. No spoilers, no spoilers. No spoilers. I just wanted to ask because when I finished the third book, I had a bittersweet feeling for how the ending was. For young adult, many writers, pretend that a good ending is when everybody's happy and they live happily ever after. Or now and then they try to kill everyone, and that's the perfect ending. But in this ending, I felt that there were many doors and windows open. I had a small feeling that it wasn't an ending. So my question is, are you thinking about a fourth book, or that's the ending that you were seeing since the beginning?
Well, in a way, it's the ending I saw since the beginning, and in a way, it isn't. I think that the contract that I set out to fulfill had to do with Karou and Akiva and the war between the seraphim and the chimera. And I believe that I satisfied that question. But what I didn't expect to do was start another question. So it is an ending to a story. And another story has begun. And there could be another book. It's not what I'm writing now. Or next. Or next. But I think I would like to write the next book. But it'll need time to grow in my mind because it's a very big story. So
it wouldn't be a fourth book. It would be another book from a different story, just with.
I'm not sure. I imagine that Karou wouldn't be the main character.
Okay.
I'm not sure. It's probably, years from now.
Possibility.
I don't know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi. I love you, and your daughter is so cute. I'm wondering, in some point of the story, did you consider it not to put Karou and Akiva together, that they end separate? In some point of the story, did you consider it to put them separate?
Sorry, I'm sure you were asking.
¿En algún momento de la historia consideraste que Akiva y Akiva y Karou no terminarán juntos?
I don't think I can answer that. I don't think everyone's finished. Yes. I mean, I don't think I really appreciated what I had set myself up for with the ending. I knew what the ending of Daughter of Smoke and Bone would be. And after, I didn't worry myself about what would come after until I sat down to start writing Days of Blood and Starlight, and I thought, oh my God, how am I supposed to ever get these two back together? Who did that? What is, and so I realized it was a really big challenge to make it seem believable that these two people could ever be together after that. And so there were times when I wondered. I worried. Yes. Who has a microphone?
Lania.
Oh,
It's me.
hello.
I'm here. I'm
Hi.
here. Well, I have a proposal of a theme for your, I don't know if it's in your next book, but it could be very interesting. Dr. Penrose from Oxford is on the certainty road to get.
I'm having a hard time understanding you. I'm sorry. Do you want to
in
Spanish?
Do I speak in Spanish?
Yeah.
Okay. El doctor Penrose de Oxford está a punto, junto con un americano, Safirov, no sé, de lograr las computadoras cuánticas, las hipercomputadoras, en las cuales el viaje de aventura y el medio de aventura va a ser a la mente humana.
I think I should probably stop you. I'm not sure. Maybe this is a more of a personal, or I don't think this is something for the whole audience, maybe. It sounds a little off the subject.
In some way, but it's a theme, es un tema que se puede desarrollar en cuanto a que eso haría que el mundo se volviera verdaderamente mágico. Podríamos escuchar, comunicarnos con los animales, podríamos entender el universo a niveles increíbles porque se aumenta en billones de trillones la posibilidad de las computadoras.
Well, thank you for the ideas. In general, I like to think of my own ideas, but I really I'm grateful for the suggestion. You should write that one. You write that book. It sounds very interesting.
Hola, Laini. Te
Hi.
amo. Gracias. Es que estoy muy nervioso. Bueno, Yo tengo una duda, no sé si alguien más la tenga, y quisiera saber si a ti como escritora te gustaría ver tus libros plasmados en una película, en la pantalla grande. Porque a mí me gustaría muchísimo y no sé, me gustaría mucho verlas. Entonces quería saber tu opinión.
Thank you for asking and thank you for being excited. The film rights were purchased by Universal Pictures 2 years ago, and it's been in development. We have producers. They're the producers of Maleficent and Alice in Wonderland movies, and they're great. And there's been a lot of work done. There's been multiple scripts. I've written a couple of screenplays, and there's been a lot of digital design work for the characters, and so it's been a lot of fun. But with film, it's not my world. I don't know how it works, and I think you don't get your hopes up until the camera actually starts to roll, so I can just cross my fingers. But yeah, I would love to see the movie. Yes. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you because thanks for your books. I met my best friend, so I'm with her. She's right here, so thank you very much for that.
Oh, wow.
And I wanted to ask you if Akiva, or the story is based in something real in your life.
Oh, I guess I don't need that. What am I doing? On, off. Somebody asked this in the last session too. I'm blessed to have a much easier romance in my life. You know, I think on the one hand, I write books that I want to climb inside of and live in, and I read books that I want to experience. But in reality, there's a lot of situations, such as forbidden love and the incredible difficulty between these two characters. I wouldn't really want that in my life. I would really like a much easier and pleasant, loving marriage without the whole world trying to tear us apart. It wouldn't make as interesting of a book, maybe. But I think there's an old curse, Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. Do you know that? That is a curse to have an interesting life. You want to read about interesting things while having a calm and nice, pleasant life. That wouldn't make a good story. So no, not really. As far as love, yes, but not fraught, destructive love.
Bueno, yo quería, hola. Bueno, mi pregunta es más sobre el personaje, sobre Karou, pues de Kuru. Me produce mucha incertidumbre. Me atrae mucho el personaje, pues, desde el punto en el que a mí también me gusta escribir y me gusta como al mismo tiempo de que voy leyendo una historia, pensar en qué se estaba basando el escritor al querer transmitir eso. Entonces, yo quisiera saber de qué parte dentro de ti viene Karou.
Karou came out of nowhere. My husband says to tell you that Karou came out of my nose. That's where she came from, but it's not true. I think I've told the story many times, but Karou, out of a day of writing where there was no plan, and she came fully formed to the page, like magic. And it doesn't usually happen like that for me, and it hadn't happened before. And it used to be that when writers would talk about how they were channeling the characters, and they felt like the characters were telling the story, and they were just a conduit for the story. I thought they were lying. I thought they were trying to make the rest of us feel bad for not having that experience. And that real writers would have that experience where it would just flow through them like the muse was writing the story. And the first experience I ever had of that was the day that Karou came into being. So she really she arrived just as she is. And I don't know, I think in many ways, she's the character that I wanted to be when I was 17. She had the life I wanted to have when I was 17. So she's a wish fulfillment character. She can fight, she's a great artist, she can speak all these languages without having to learn them, she can travel around the world. It was a wish fulfillment, yeah. That's where she came from.
Laini, siempre he tenido la duda de que cuando escribí el tercer libro, ¿cómo te nació la idea de que Liras y Siri se quedaran juntos?
I don't know what you're talking about. Who? Together? Yeah. Don't listen to her. Yes.
Hi, here. Laini. Laini, over here.
Oh, thank you, sorry.
Well, first of all, I'm really happy to meet you, and you're my favorite author. And well, my question is that well, you have a lot of characters dead, and my question is that how you feel to kill them, like well, in the second book, I really felt bad about one character, and I was like,
I won't say, okay. There's a quote from a book that I love. It's one of my favorite quotes from all books. It's from the graphic novel The Rabbi's Cat by Johann Spar. And the quote is, "Sometimes you kill just one person and it takes care of everything." Which I have found in my life to be true. No, not really. It's difficult. It's really difficult to kill characters or to end characters. My daughter's making that face again. She doesn't approve at all. But I feel that in the kind of story that this is, it was necessary that you wouldn't feel the truth of Karou's situation all the time. And I think overall, the body count is very low. So, but there was a few important characters that had to be sacrificed for the story. And it's never, I mean, I joke going like this because it's never easy. With the one that happens in Days of Blood and Starlight, I thought until the very moment it happened, I didn't know if I would be able to do it, if it needed to happen, but then I decided it did need to happen.
Necesita el micrófono. No, necesita el micrófono allá.
No, I mean, it's the story. And so I have some general ideas of what's going to happen. Or usually I have one big event that I know I'm working towards. And I try to find my way to that thing. And in the second book, that thing was the thing that happens at the end with Thiago and Ziri. That was that was what drove me through that book, trying to get to that point. And everything that happens along the way, I discover it as I go. So sometimes I know maybe this character, that changes a lot. The story doesn't always go exactly as I expect. And I try not to know exactly, I try not to know too much ahead of time because I like to discover it in the moment. I think if you decide ahead of time too much, it's not natural. The character, you know, the story has to evolve naturally, or it may feel like the author is forcing it into an outline that isn't organic, that isn't true to the story and the characters. So it surprises me all the time. Yes.
Tenemos solo un par de preguntas porque ya se nos está acabando el tiempo, entonces. Gracias.
Oh, does she have them? I'm confused. Who does? Oh, there. Oh.
Normalmente siempre les pregunto a los escritores algo sobre cómo ser escritor. Como tus libros me encantan demasiado, voy a preguntar, ¿qué pasó con Chiro?
Oh, that's not a spoiler. I mean, if you haven't even read the first book, I mean, you never find out in the books what happened to Chiro. I'm not sure, but I think she probably ended up in a labor camp because they would think that she had set Akiva free. So she would be punished as if she had done it. That's what I think. And she deserved it, so. She was punished. That's what I think happened to Chiro. But I could change my mind since I've never committed that to paper. Who knows? Maybe we will see Chiro's story someday. Maybe she'll appear alive someday. I don't know. Jael and Chiro in true love. And I think the most important thing is to commit yourself to it, especially now when you're young. I think I was lucky that my parents didn't force me to have a backup plan to get a degree in something reasonable or practical. They always understood. And I think when you're young, it's important to devote 100% of yourself to your dream because it takes at least 100%. And if you're studying something else or working a job that takes all of your best energy and then trying to write on the weekends, it can be done, but it will be much harder. Not everyone has the luxury, I guess, but my husband and I both decided to take the path after art school of working, living a meager artist life and not having any extra money so that we could spend all of our time writing and doing art and just work just enough to pay the bills. And we weren't worried about having a job that would be glamorous or impressive to our friends, or we were committed to putting the energy into being artists. And that becomes much more difficult when you're older and you have a family to support or you have more bills to pay. So I think just giving all of your energy to your dream of being a writer is the most important thing, and doing it, really doing it, and not worrying about the part about getting published at first, because that, I say this sort of glibly, but the truth is it's easy to get published if you've written a good book. And the hard part is writing the good book, and that's like 99% of it. And it's just you and your computer or your pencil, and so it's a lot of work, and you have to be willing to do the work. Yeah. So good luck.
Pues muchas gracias, Laini, por estar aquí con nosotros.
Thank you all.
No. Los esperamos a la firma que va a estar en este momento en el área de firmas internacional. Muchas gracias, y les recordamos que las transmisiones de Penguin Random House están en Me Gusta Leer en lafil.com. Gracias.